On a sweltering July afternoon, a president raises a glass of iced milk to his lips. Within hours, he is vomiting. Within 5 days, he is dead. The date is July 4th, 1850. Zachary Taylor, 12th President of the United States, stands at the Washington Monument construction site, surrounded by crowds celebrating Independence Day. The heat is brutal. He eats fresh cherries and iced milk. He returns to the White House feeling unwell. By nightfall, he is in agony. His stomach cramps violently. Doctors rush to his bedside and apply every treatment 19th century medicine can offer. None of it works. On July 9th, the old soldier who survived 40 years of battlefield hardship draws his last breath. The nation mourns. The official cause is cholera morbus, a vague term for a severe gastrointestinal illness, but not everyone accepts that explanation. Taylor had just clashed fiercely with Southern leaders over whether slavery should expand into new territories. His death handed power to a vice president far more sympathetic to slaveholders. To some, the timing was no coincidence. The whispers would not die. They would echo for 141 years until someone finally decided to dig up the truth. Zachary Taylor was 65 years old when he took the oath of office in March 1849. He was a career soldier, a man who had spent 4 decades in uniform fighting Native American wars, chasing Seminole fighters through Florida swamps, and commanding troops in the Mexican War. He had never held elected office before reaching the White House. He owned a plantation in Louisiana and held enslaved people there, yet he ran as a Whig and won. Almost immediately, he began surprising the men who put him in power. He refused to be a puppet. He took firm positions on the most explosive question in American politics, whether slavery would expand into the vast territories seized from Mexico. He told California and New Mexico to skip territorial status and apply for statehood directly, which would make them free states. Southern leaders were furious. They had assumed a Louisiana slaveholder would protect their interests. Instead, Taylor drew a line. He even threatened to lead the army himself against any state that tried to secede. The tension was building toward a crisis, and then the 4th of July arrived. Taylor was 65 years old when he took the oath of office in March 1849. He had spent 4 decades in uniform, fighting in the War of 1812, the Black Hawk War, and the Mexican-American War, where his battlefield victories had made him a national hero. He had never held elected office before becoming president. He was a Louisiana slaveholder, a career military man, and the candidate of the Whig Party. Yet once in the White House, he refused to act as anyone expected. He owned enslaved people, but opposed the expansion of slavery into new territories. He had been elected as a Whig, but resisted his own party's congressional leaders. He surrounded himself with a cabinet that included political rivals rather than loyalists. His independence frustrated allies and enemies alike. By the summer of 1850, the nation he led was tearing itself apart over whether slavery would spread westward. California wanted to join the Union as a free state. Southern politicians openly threatened secession. Henry Clay was assembling a grand compromise in the Senate, and Taylor was standing in the way. The president had vowed to veto any bill that carried slavery into territory taken from Mexico. Into this volatile moment came the 4th of July. He had spent 4 decades in the Army, leading troops through the War of 1812, the Black Hawk War, and the Mexican-American War. His battlefield nickname, Old Rough and Ready, spoke to a man who slept in tents and ate what his soldiers ate. The Whig Party nominated him in 1848 precisely because he was a winner, not a politician. They expected a compliant figurehead. They got something else entirely. The old soldier had his own mind, and he intended to use it. Taylor owned enslaved people on his Louisiana plantation, yet as president, he refused to defend slavery's expansion into the new Western territories. He told Southern leaders that if they rebelled, he would personally lead an army to hang them, and he had done exactly that kind of thing before. California, booming after the gold rush, sought admission as a free state. The South saw its political balance slipping away. Threats of secession filled the halls of Congress. Henry Clay worked to craft a grand compromise that might hold the fragile republic together. Taylor looked at the gathering storm and chose a different path, one that put him on a collision course with powerful men who had expected him to yield. On the morning of July 4th, 1850, Taylor walked to the Washington Monument grounds. The Capitol was celebrating Independence Day with speeches, cannons, and crowds gathered under a brutal summer sun. Taylor, a military man who had spent decades in field camps, wore his heavy dark coat and refused to seek shade. He stood through hours of ceremony under the open sky, sweating beside dignitaries and citizens alike. The temperature that day was reported to be among the hottest of the season in Washington, though exact records from the period are incomplete. After the ceremonies, Taylor returned to the White House and sat down to eat. He consumed large quantities of raw fruit, iced milk, and cold water. Modern gastroenterologists have noted that combining contaminated dairy with acidic fruit in extreme heat can create an ideal environment for bacterial infection, though no surviving source confirms the exact sanitary conditions of the White House kitchen that day. By evening, Taylor felt unwell. By nightfall, he was in severe distress, gripped by violent cramps and relentless diarrhea. His personal physicians were summoned to the president's bedside, but the medicine they practiced in 1850 relied on treatments that would be considered dangerous today. They administered calomel, opium, and bleedings, interventions that likely weakened him further while the real illness ran its course unchecked through his body. This stance made him enemies in his own party and in the South. Southern newspapers warned that Taylor had betrayed the very voters who elected him. Whig allies grew frustrated that their president refused to follow the party line. The Compromise of 1850 hung in the balance, and every faction in Washington watched Taylor for any sign of weakness or shift. You can see why this political pressure cooker mattered. When a president dies suddenly in the middle of such a crisis, suspicion does not need much fuel to ignite. Taylor had no known serious illness at the time. He was a career soldier who had survived decades of battlefield hardship and tropical campaigns. Yet the debate over slavery was tearing the country apart, and some believed the stakes were high enough to justify murder. Historians disagree about how seriously contemporaries suspected foul play. Most evidence suggests the poisoning theory emerged years later, not in the immediate aftermath of his death. But the political climate made such a theory plausible to later generations looking back at the records. On the morning of July 4th, 1850, Taylor walked to the Washington Monument grounds under a blistering summer sun. On the morning of July 4th, 1850, Zachary Taylor walked to the grounds of the Washington Monument. The Capitol was celebrating Independence Day. The sun beat down mercilessly on the unfinished construction site. Temperatures soared well into the 90s. The ceremony stretched on for hours under a blistering sky. Taylor, a military man accustomed to discipline, endured the heat alongside thousands of citizens. During and after the event, he sought relief from the oppressive warmth. He drank large quantities of ice water and iced milk. He consumed cherries and other fresh fruit, a common summer indulgence. By that evening, the president felt unwell. His stomach churned. A wave of nausea swept over him. He retired to the White House, assuming the discomfort would pass by morning. It did not pass. Through the night, his condition deteriorated steadily. The discomfort became pain. The pain became something far more alarming. Whatever had taken hold inside the president's body was not releasing its grip. His staff grew anxious. By the following day, it was clear this was no ordinary summer ailment. The treatments his doctors would soon apply reflected the best medical knowledge of 1850, though that knowledge would prove painfully limited. His doctors gathered at his bedside. They were men of standing, trained in the medicine of their time. Dr. Thomas Miller and Dr. Robert McComb led the effort. They reached for the tools their profession trusted. Calomel, a compound of mercury chloride, was given to purge the bowels. Opium was administered to quiet the pain. Quinine was prescribed to fight fever, and bleeding, the ancient practice of withdrawing blood to restore balance, was applied to a body already weakened by relentless illness. Each intervention followed the accepted textbook of 19th century American medicine. None of them worked. The cramps did not subside. The fever did not break. The diarrhea continued through the night. Modern physicians looking back at this record have noted a grim irony. The treatments themselves may have deepened the crisis. Mercury and opium, given in repeated doses to a man suffering acute gastrointestinal distress, would today be considered dangerous. Bleeding a dehydrated patient would strip away what little strength remained. The very remedies meant to save him likely made things worse. On July 8th, Taylor reportedly told those gathered closely around his bedside that he would not survive. The words carried the weight of a soldier who had faced death on battlefields from the War of 1812 to the Mexican-American War. Now his enemy was invisible, and his body was failing. He died on the afternoon of July 9, 1850, inside the White House. He was 65 years old. His presidency had lasted barely 16 months. The nation lost a president at one of the most dangerous moments in its young history. The official cause of death was listed as cholera morbus. But you should understand that this phrase carried a very different meaning in 1850 than it might suggest today. It was a 19th century catch-all term, a broad diagnostic label that physicians reached for when they faced illnesses they could not fully explain. It told you almost nothing precise about what was actually happening inside the president's body. And the absence of an autopsy meant that no one would ever examine the organs directly or search for harder evidence. The label would stand for decades, but it would also raise questions that would simply not go away. Those questions would only grow louder over time. The nation received the news of Taylor's death with shock. Flags fell at half-staff across Washington. Crowds gathered outside the White House gates, straining for any word from inside. Millard Fillmore, the vice president, took the oath of office the very next day, inheriting a presidency fractured along the fault line of slavery. Taylor had stood firm against the expansion of slave territory into new western states. Fillmore, by contrast, would prove far more accommodating to Southern interests. The political shift was immediate, and for many, it raised uncomfortable questions. Taylor's body traveled from Washington to Louisville, Kentucky, where he was laid to rest in a family cemetery on a hill overlooking the Ohio River. The grave was simple. The ceremony was quiet. No autopsy had been performed, no detailed medical record kept. Only the broad diagnosis of cholera morbus appeared on the official documents. For decades, that diagnosis stood unchallenged. Americans accepted that a president had been killed by bad food and a brutal summer, but the questions never fully disappeared. They lingered in the margins of history, waiting for someone to pull them into the light. For more than a century, the story of Zachary Taylor's death remained settled. Americans accepted it as a tragedy of bad food, bad water, and a fragile constitution in a sweltering Washington summer. No autopsy had been performed. No suspicious findings had ever been recorded. The president was buried, and the nation moved on into the volatile politics of the Compromise of 1850. But history sometimes refuses to stay quiet. In the late 1970s, a political scientist named Michael Parenti began questioning the official narrative. He was later joined by Clara Rising, an author and educator who devoted years to re-examining the circumstances surrounding Taylor's sudden illness. Together, they advanced a provocative claim. They argued that the 12th President of the United States had not died by accident. They believed he had been murdered. The accusation was not built on a confession or a smoking weapon. It rested on circumstantial threads, historical timing, and political motive. Taylor had opposed the spread of slavery into new territories. He had threatened to veto the very compromise legislation that powerful Southern politicians desperately wanted passed. His death, they argued, arrived at a dangerously convenient moment for those men. The theory would grow louder, capture public attention, and eventually force a question nobody thought possible. Could a president of the United States have been poisoned in the White House? The theory rested on a political motive. Taylor had opposed the spread of slavery into new Western territories. He had threatened to veto any compromise package that expanded it. Powerful Southern legislators wanted the Compromise of 1850 passed, and Taylor stood directly in their path. Remove him, and the presidency would fall to Millard Fillmore, a man far more sympathetic to their legislative goals. To supporters of the poisoning theory, this was not coincidence, it was opportunity. Arsenic, they argued, was the perfect instrument. It could mimic the very gastrointestinal illness that doctors had already diagnosed. It was available, traceable in small doses, and lethal over several days. The symptoms Taylor exhibited, nausea, cramping, diarrhea, dehydration, matched both the severe stomach effectiveness and chronic arsenic exposure. No physician in 1850 could distinguish between the two. No autopsy had ever been performed. The body had been sealed in a crypt in Louisville, Kentucky, untouched for over a century. What no one could answer with paper records alone was whether arsenic was actually inside those remains. The question would eventually require something far more invasive than historical analysis. The arsenic theory had a strange durability for a claim built entirely on inference. Arsenic poisoning produces gastrointestinal symptoms remarkably similar to cholera morbus, the very diagnosis doctors gave Taylor in 1850. That overlap meant the same evidence could support two completely different conclusions. A stomach ailment could explain everything, or poison could explain everything. No autopsy had ever been performed to settle the matter. Taylor was buried quickly, as was common in the summer heat, and his body went into the ground without scientific examination. For more than a century, that absence of proof kept the question alive. The theory drifted through historical circles, never fully accepted, never fully dismissed. Then a rising author named Clara Rising brought it into public view in the early 1990s. She argued that Taylor had been murdered at a moment when his opposition to slavery's expansion made him dangerous to powerful men. Newspapers picked up the story. Television crews followed. The question reached Taylor's living descendants, who decided that silence was no longer enough. They gave their consent to do something almost unheard of for a former president. They agreed to open his grave. On June 17, 1991, a crew gathers at Zachary Taylor's tomb in Louisville, Kentucky. The stone is lifted. The casket is raised from the ground for the first time in over a century. Kentucky State Medical Examiner Dr. George Nichols oversees the entire operation. Forensic specialists from the Oak Ridge National Laboratory in Tennessee stand ready to assist. You watch as the remains are carefully documented and removed from the crypt. The team collects hair samples, fingernail clippings, bone fragments, and soft tissue. Each specimen is sealed, labeled, and transported under controlled conditions to the laboratory. The stakes are high. If arsenic is present at lethal levels, the history books will need rewriting. If it is not, the poisoning theory collapses. ORNL deploys neutron activation analysis, one of the most sensitive detection methods available at the time. This technique can identify trace amounts of arsenic measured in parts per million, far beyond the reach of ordinary chemical tests. The samples are bombarded with neutrons inside a nuclear reactor. Each element emits a characteristic radiation signature. The scientists wait for the data to speak. The results will either confirm a murder or close the door on a rumor that has shadowed Taylor's legacy for generations. Hair, fingernail, bone, and tissue samples were carefully collected from the remains and sent for testing. The Oak Ridge National Laboratory in Tennessee took charge of the analysis. Their scientists chose neutron activation analysis, one of the most sensitive detection methods available at the time. This technique could measure trace amounts of arsenic down to levels that earlier forensic tools simply could not reach. The process required irradiating each sample inside a nuclear reactor. When bombarded with neutrons, arsenic atoms emit characteristic radiation that instruments can detect and quantify with extraordinary precision. Every fragment of Taylor's remains was treated as evidence in a potential homicide investigation. The laboratory worked methodically over the following weeks. Scientists ran comparison samples and calibrated their instruments repeatedly to eliminate error. The stakes were enormous. If arsenic appeared at lethal concentrations, the history of the American presidency would change overnight. A sitting president might have been murdered in the White House over the question of slavery. If the levels were low, the poisoning theory would collapse under the weight of modern science. The nation waited while the reactor hummed, and the instruments counted atoms that had been silent for 141 years. The arsenic concentrations found in Taylor's remains were not just below a lethal dose. They were consistent with normal background exposure, the kind any person living in the 19th century would naturally accumulate from food, water, and everyday surroundings. Dr. William Maples and Dr. George Nichols stood before the press and delivered the verdict plainly. There was no evidence of poisoning. The arsenic theory, which had cast a shadow over Taylor's death for more than a century, was closed. Not by historical argument, not by political debate, by chemistry. Neutron activation analysis had measured the truth at the atomic level, and the truth was unambiguous. Whatever killed Zachary Taylor in July of 1850, it was not arsenic deliberately introduced by a human hand. The exhumation had served its purpose. The conspiracy theory was laid to rest, even if the president himself could not be. The investigation closed the book on assassination once and for all. But if poison was ruled out, then what actually happened inside the White House during those 5 sweltering days? The answer lay not in a laboratory, but in the conditions of a Washington summer, and in the fragile, imperfect state of 19th century medicine. The poisoning theory was closed, not by argument, not by politics, and not by the passage of time. It was closed by chemistry. The arsenic levels in Zachary Taylor's remains were indistinguishable from what any 19th century body would naturally absorb from soil, water, and everyday life. There was no murder hidden in the numbers. With the conspiracy laid to rest, the question shifted back to what actually killed a sitting president in 5 days. The most widely accepted modern assessment points to a severe gastrointestinal infection. Washington in 1850 had sanitation that would alarm any modern health official. Open sewers ran through the streets. Drinking water came from sources shared with waste. Contaminated food and water were constant threats, and summer heat made them worse. The cherries and iced milk Taylor consumed on July 4th are mentioned in nearly every account, but no record preserves the specific pathogen. Without cultures or molecular tools, 19th century doctors could describe symptoms but could not name the organism destroying him from within. The most widely accepted modern assessment is that Taylor died from a severe gastrointestinal infection, likely caused by contaminated food or water during a period when Washington sanitation was notoriously poor. The iced milk and cherries are often mentioned in accounts of that day, though pinpointing the exact pathogen is impossible without modern cultures or molecular analysis. Cholera, typhoid, salmonella, and other waterborne and foodborne infections were common in mid-19th century Washington, D.C. The mercury-based treatments he received may have compounded the illness rather than relieved it. It is important to state the limits of certainty. No definitive diagnosis can be made from the historical record alone. What the evidence does support is that a man in his 66th year, in a city with open sewers and unreliable water, consumed something that triggered a violent gastrointestinal collapse. His doctors, working without germ theory, responded with treatments that likely worsened rather than helped this condition. The arsenic theory, dramatic as it was, could not survive the laboratory results. What remained was something far more ordinary than poison, and no less fatal. To understand why this ordinary outcome was so dangerous, you have to look closely at the city where it happened. The historical record alone cannot deliver a definitive diagnosis. The 1991 exhumation ruled out arsenic poisoning as the cause of death, but it did not identify the actual pathogen responsible for Taylor's illness. That gap leaves the medical question partially answered and permanently open. What the records do reveal is that medical treatment in 1850 may have worsened his condition. Taylor's physicians administered calomel, a mercury-based purgative standard in 19th century practice. Mercury compounds were prescribed to purge the body of disease, yet they often damaged the kidneys and the gastrointestinal tract further. In a patient already suffering from severe dehydration and digestive distress, such treatment could have accelerated the downward spiral. Experts debate whether Taylor succumbed to the infection itself, to the treatment, or to some combination of both. Sources disagree on the precise chain of medical events, and the records are incomplete. What remains certain is that his body was failing under the weight of an illness his doctors could neither identify nor effectively treat. The consequences of that failure would reshape the nation's highest office at a dangerously volatile moment. Taylor's death on July 9, 1850, set in motion an immediate transfer of power. Vice President Millard Fillmore took the oath of office the very next day. The transition was swift, almost seamless, and it shifted the presidency in a direction Taylor had resisted. Fillmore had quietly disagreed with Taylor's handling of the slavery crisis. Now he held the office himself, and he intended to use it. Taylor's cabinet, loyal to the fallen president and his policies, submitted their resignations almost immediately. Fillmore accepted them. He assembled a new group of advisors, men aligned with his own vision for the nation's future. The change was not merely personal, it was ideological. Where Taylor had threatened to veto certain provisions of the compromise then moving through Congress, Fillmore signaled a very different posture. He was willing to sign. The legislation that Taylor might have blocked now had a clear path to the president's desk. The consequences of that shift would ripple outward, touching every corner of the escalating sectional crisis and reshaping the balance of power between North and South. Taylor's death transferred power to Vice President Millard Fillmore, who took a markedly different approach. Fillmore supported the Compromise of 1850, signed the Fugitive Slave Act into law, and replaced Taylor's entire cabinet. The compromise delayed the Civil War by a decade, but intensified sectional tensions across the nation. Whether Taylor, had he lived, would have vetoed key provisions of that compromise remains one of history's open questions. His death did not cause the compromise, but it removed a significant obstacle to its passage. You can see the chain of consequences clearly. A president dies in July. A new president takes office within days. A sweeping legislative package moves forward. A fugitive slave law enforces the return of escaped people to bondage. The political landscape shifts, and the country steps closer to the conflict it spent 10 more years trying to avoid. Taylor's position on slavery's expansion into new territories had been firm. He had threatened to veto any compromise that extended it westward. Fillmore chose accommodation instead. The records are incomplete on what Taylor might have ultimately done, but the contrast between the two presidents is unmistakable. One stood ready to draw a line, the other signed the line away. Zachary Taylor served only 16 months as president, yet his death became one of the most debated presidential mysteries in American history. He was a soldier who reached the White House without prior political office, and he confronted a nation tearing itself apart over slavery. His sudden illness after the 4th of July celebration in 1850 shocked a country already on edge. Within 5 days, he was gone. You can trace the facts that survive. He drank cold milk and chilled water on a hot day. He developed severe gastrointestinal symptoms. His doctors administered treatments that modern physicians would question. He died in the White House, surrounded by his family and cabinet. What you cannot trace with certainty is the exact cause. The poisoning theory emerged decades later, fueled by political tension and the strange abruptness of his decline. It persisted because the circumstances invited suspicion. A president opposed to slavery's expansion dies suddenly at the very moment compromise hangs in the balance. You can understand why questions lingered, but suspicion is not proof, and proof is what forensic science ultimately demanded. That demand would lead to a remarkable decision more than a century after Taylor was laid to rest. Zachary Taylor served only 16 months, but his death became one of the examined presidential mysteries in American history. You can trace that mystery across 3 different worlds: a crowded Independence Day celebration, a dim White House sick room, and a modern forensic laboratory. The evidence never produced a single diagnosis. 19th century medical notes were incomplete. The symptoms were reported through the language of their time. Modern physicians have proposed severe gastroenteritis, typhoid fever, cholera, or another intestinal infection. No later analysis can recreate the contaminated water, food, weather, and treatment that surrounded his final days. Yet the 1991 examination changed what could responsibly be claimed. The arsenic level in Taylor's remains was far too low to support the theory that poison killed him. That result did not answer every medical question. It did remove the conspiracy's physical foundation. His death still altered the country's course. Millard Fillmore entered the presidency and supported the Compromise of 1850, a settlement Taylor had resisted. The Union held, temporarily. The conflict over slavery did not disappear, it deepened. So Taylor's final mystery survives with narrower boundaries. Not a proven murder, but a sudden death shaped by an era of unsafe sanitation, limited medicine, and fierce politics. And that distinction matters as the evidence is weighed one final time. You are standing at the edge of a Louisville cemetery where a president once lay beneath a simple stone. The earth that was opened in 1991 has long since settled again. The lab results sit archived in forensic files, their numbers quietly definitive. Arsenic levels in Zachary Taylor's remains matched what you would expect from ordinary 19th century life, not from a deliberate poisoning. The conspiracy theory that gripped public imagination for over a century did not survive the spectrometer. What remains is something harder to romanticize, but no less sobering. A man consumed contaminated food and water during a sweltering Washington summer. His gastrointestinal tract collapsed under an infection modern medicine might have treated in hours. No assassin, no shadowy plot, no political cabal ended his presidency. A microbe did. The vacuum left by his death shifted the balance of power at the exact moment the nation needed steady hands. Millard Fillmore inherited a cabinet reshuffled, a compromise fractured, and a country sliding toward civil war. Taylor's body now rests undisturbed, his story no longer a question of poison, but a reminder that history's most persistent mysteries sometimes dissolve, not in drama, but in quiet, measured science.